Hey Rob,
Hey Dave,
what are you working on?
I am transferring marks to a template that I'm going to use to transfer marks from the old backer boards to the new. We'll take a look at this in a minute, but I've got the old backer boards laid out in the position that I want them to be in. I planed out some new boards for it. Dave had the right size pine in the shop. I went with splines in between them. On the original backer boards it was tongue and groove, which did a pretty good job of shedding water. In this case, in order to get the width of the boards that I wanted and to allow a little bit of flexibility, then I put grooves in both sides of both boards and I inserted splines. So now I've got to get my template set up. I've got this sheet of plywood that I'm going to cut into an arch, and then I'm going to be able to transfer the original scratch marks on the old backer board onto this template, lay the template down, and then transfer the marks from the old one onto the new. In order to establish this arch, I made a small template board, which is right there, and I have gotten a square level edge here. I've got a center mark. I've got my end marks cut to where they need to be. So now it's just a matter of transferring everything over.
And what do you mean when you say template board?
Good question. I might not be using the right language here, but I'm using this as a way of locating the marks that I need, and I am transferring those marks onto another piece that's going to fit within the original piece. And when I have them drawn out, you can see that I've traced 4 times using this. And what I had done was I had marks on the backer boards. I located the marks with the point of this, and I traced those marks onto this board. Now I'm doing that as a way of setting up for the larger template board, because in order for me to access all of the scratch marks that I need on the old backer boards, I'm going to need to get a lot closer to where the marks are. So just to get that angle and to practice with this tool, then I took, I put this down and I marked it all onto here.
And when you say backer board, what do you mean?
The backer boards for the bonnet that I've been working on for the Abraham Wendell house.
They're
the structural support that holds the original bonnet against the building.
So this isn't like some decorative piece of wood?
No, it's not. No. Although some of it will be exposed. If you pan over to the original backer boards, then you can see anywhere that's painted is going to be exposed, and anywhere that's not painted has some sort of decorative element to it. The original backer boards, you probably can't see it in the film. There are scratch marks where they did the original layout. And if you were to put this up against the house, then what you would do is you would see structural elements coming off, which I don't know what to call them. What would you call those, Dave? I would call them framing, maybe? Framing members. They're about 2 by 8 pieces. And those are the members that all of the moldings, that the roof, and that a lot of the decorative elements come off of.
I see some rot in the frame that I'm in right now.
Some rot?
Right there.
Yes.
What's that all about?
Well, the reason this came down is because a carpenter's ant's nest found an opportunistic place to create a colony. So this was up for over 200 years. The roof had been improperly fixed at least a couple of times, or maybe not maintained well over the last half a century. So eventually the carpenter ants moved in. They started removing any loose material and making a colony. So the rot that you see is moisture that was trapped up there. There are other spots that look like rot, but they're almost like sanded smooth. like this spot here. The carpenter ants, they don't eat the wood, but they're very good at removing any of the loose material. That way they can expand on their home. And that's what happened here.
So that has painted areas and unpainted areas.
Yep. This has a carved element that goes right here. It has two carved arches that go on either side of the inner area where there's a light above the entry door.
Those carved arches are missing.
They are.
Do you still have them?
I still have them. They're in pieces. They'll need to be glued together and reassembled before they can go back in place.
That'll probably be tricky to glue curved pieces back together.
Yes. Yep. I'm going to have to find a way of making a curved mold or curved clamping surfaces that I'm able to actually put the pieces into with glue or possibly marine epoxy. That way it will hold them with the right amount of pressure to be able to attach them together again.
Well, be sure to let us know when you're doing that. That
Sure.
that sounds fascinating. In the midst of all of this, it still sounds fascinating.
Okay.
Gluing curved pieces together. Something most people don't get to do. So there was a keystone and a couple of curved moldings.
Yep. Each of these curved moldings went down to almost a quarter of a radius, and each one was carved out of a single piece of wood.
Excellent.
And they were severely over-nailed. They used a nail that has a very good holding power, and I think they had access to a large supply of inexpensive ones. So they used tons of nails along this, and because of the way those carved elements are, especially at either end, it was very prone to developing problems because they were basically carved across the grain.
That piece in the middle, is that a keystone?
It's like a keystone.
Do you still have it?
I do. Yep.
Excellent.
So this was the keystone, which I've got it wrapped in plastic right now. It has a very heavy amount of paint from 200 years of continually being painted over. Very tricky. There are some curved sort of spheres inside of it. Very deep areas, and not very easy to be able to strip out using mechanical means or using heat. So what I did is I used a chemical in strip ease, which is called, what's the name of that chemical, Dave?
Methylene chloride.
Methylene chloride.
That's dangerous
A
stuff.
lot of fun to work with.
Hopefully you wear a respirator. Cartridge respirator.
Definitely use proper PPE.
Don't try this at home.
Don't try this at home. They don't actually sell that product anymore.
Not that that stops you, but could.
Well, I still have some on the shelf, and it is a very effective product as long as you take a lot of precautions when you're working with
Well,
it.
hopefully there's not too much history left to have paint taken off.
Yep.
All right. Now I see, and I'm going to tighten in because I don't know if the people at home can see this, but I can see a very, very funny sawtooth pattern on the edge of what was painted to what isn't painted.
Sure.
And it seems like it continues all the way around, and I am at a loss as to what that could be.
Sure. What I will call the ceiling of the bonnet.
Which is curved to follow the shape of the roof.
Yes, that has flutes carved into it that come out perpendicular to the wall of the house.
So
this
we
is
are
a
looking at
poor
the
sketch,
ribs of the
but
flutes.
We're looking at the ribs of the flutes.
And you've made a small sketch there. Maybe I can tighten it enough to see it.
Not to scale, but
I
that gives you
see
kind
it.
of an idea.
I see it. Boy, your fingers are big.
Okay. I'll try to move
No, that's good.
slowly.
That's good. So those flutes must have made it easier to bend that piece of wood.
I'm sure that must be the case. They removed a lot of wood that would normally be under compression
Yes.
when you're trying to make that arch. So, good observation, Dave. I know you're new to this business, but it's not just an aesthetic thing. It was to provide an easy way of installing that.
Probably easier than trying to steam a piece of wood to go on something like that.
Yeah, well, did they steam wood back in 1810?
Steaming was a thing, I'm told,
Okay.
quite some time back, but they didn't steam with pressure. because they couldn't hold air pressure until the latter part of the 19th century.
Okay.
So it was really just saturating it with water was what the steaming was
Saturating it
doing.
with hot
Yeah,
steaming
and they
water.
didn't have
Yeah.
much for steam.
Okay.
But here's very similar to what you said. It removes some of the issue of compression. Here's the little thing that I believe to be true about steaming wood is when you steam wood, you don't actually make it so you can stretch it. You steam it so you can compress it.
Press it. Yeah.
So the long side of a piece of wood stays that way, and the steam helps you crush the fibers on the short side,
Okay.
which they achieved by just planing them out of the way by making all those little flutes.
Okay. And the wood that they were using was, I'm sure, cured, but not, or it was dried, but not to the extent that we would consider dry wood now. They would have cut it, they would have stacked it in a yard, they would have moved it to the site. It would have taken between 6 months and a year for something like this. Was that about right, Dave?
I believe so.
Okay, so the wood was not freshly cut, but it was green, it was pliable. I've noticed the grain on a lot of this wood is tighter than the pine that you see nowadays. They were using older growth.
Yeah, better trees.
A lot of, they had a lot going for them, a lot of flexibility in what they were creating. So now in the time of machinists and machined tools, I mean, my compound square is probably more accurate than a lot of the tools that they had back then, and that's just a everyday carry tool. So I have to go from having all of those tools back to a place of trying to create something that is the same as the way it was, including some of the flexibility that's built into that. Part of the challenge for me has been figuring out where to draw the line between something being established as spot on or perfect and something that is good enough, because in this case good enough is better than perfect.
Very good. Thank you.